Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. Welcome to One to One. A federal judge monitoring Rikers Island has ordered that an outside remediation manager be appointed to try to improve conditions at the troubled jail complex. She said the city and the Department of Correction had violated the constitutional rights of prisoners and staff and ignored her orders for years. Few incidents dramatize the dysfunction of Rikers Island more than the death of Kalief Browder. In 2015, at age 22, he committed suicide after having been held there for 3 years without coming to trial, most of the time in solitary confinement. In the documentary For Venida, for Kalief, filmmaker Sisa Bueno examines how Browder's death affected his family, how it ignited public rage over the deplorable conditions at Rikers, and fueled renewed demands that Rikers be shut down. Yet efforts to shut the jail or even reform it seem to have gone nowhere. Here to discuss why is director Sisa Bueno, and joining her is Darren Mack, co-founder and co-director of Freedom Agenda, a movement whose mission is to close Rikers Island and reduce incarceration overall. Welcome. Sisa, your film is especially timely given Judge Laura Swain's recent ruling. What prompted you to make the film?
Thank you for having us, Sheryl. Yeah, you're right. It is actually very timely. And unfortunately, it will continue to be timely because this is a recurring issue that we've been contending with as a city for
years and years.
Decades, which, as the film ended up showing, which we can talk about that in a minute, but what inspired me to start this was literally just being so moved by Kalief's death. I think most of us who were tapped in consciously to, I guess, what's going on in the city were deeply impacted, and I was one of them. And literally, the way it happened was just by happenstance, this desire, that, artists have when they say that they just can't get an idea out of their mind. It's exactly how I felt. I just could not stop thinking about what happened to Kalief for some reason. And so I decided to go to an event, and this is actually an event that I decided to bring a camera to. I was called to bring a camera with me. I don't know, I just decided to, and Venida was speaking. So this is when she was alive at the time, and she was advocating for Kalief, even though Kalief had passed on, and just sort of trying to get justice for her son. And in that moment, I arrive, and I'm sort of a late person sometimes, and I arrive, and there's only one seat available, and it's literally in the front row, in her eye line, and I set my camera up, and I'm filming her, and when the Q&A portion comes up, they ask her, well, how are you coping with everything that you've been dealing with? And it was then when she just revealed that she writes poems privately. And the light bulb just went over in my head, and I just knew that I was going to make the film, a film, with her and her words.
And you use that poetry in the film.
Yes, correct.
I need to point out, I had always thought up until this time, preparation for this show, that Kalief had committed suicide while he was at Rikers, but it actually happened 2 years afterwards?
That's right. He was released. He was released on a technicality. He was innocent, but he never had a trial. There's a complicated system involved when if you don't get a trial by a specific time, you are then ordered to be released, which is very rare for a person stuck in Rikers to get to, but somehow in Kalief's case, he did get to that point. He was being held for so long that they had to ultimately release him. He was being held with no trial, correction, for so long that they had to release him. So he was released, and he went back to his normal life, or tried to, but he was no longer a normal person. He had endured, 2.5 years or so of solitary confinement while in Rikers, again, waiting for trial.
Why was he in solitary confinement?
There are many reasons for that. As Darren can actually speak to more deeply, they have impunity in terms of how they use this kind of punitive measure. So it could be, because they want to punish you for a specific reason, or they say it's for your protection, which is what happened in Kalief's case. There were many instances where he was being attacked by other incarcerated people in that space. and they decided, for his own protection, that he should be in solitary. And that was the majority of the 3-year period that he was there was in solitary. And again, he was 16 years old at the time, in and out, and was a teenager at this time enduring that. And as a young brain enduring that kind of abuse, it resulted in him having a really traumatized mind. And so when he was released, and he had so much support, obviously his family and his friends, and he was back to school, went to Bronx Community College. He had a very supportive system, as the film shows, at Bronx Community College. And yet, with all of that, he still ended up committing suicide at home. It was just too much to bear. I'm caught up in time as it stands still. Things are happening around me, but for me, everything is moving at a snail's pace. My mind is adrift as the visions of life float around me. You see, time stopped for me the day my son died. I cannot fast forward the clock to the present, nor can I rewind it and prevent his death. I will forever be stuck in time on that faithful day, the day my son Kalief took his life.
And he was in jail for a fairly, it was for stealing a backpack. It was not for armed robbery or
Correct.
murder.
It was very minor.
Assault.
If it was anything, they escalated it to felony robbery or felony burglary. I forget what the actual term is, but it's like they escalated it to a felony robbery charge. But again, he always maintained his innocence. They could never find the accuser, which is another situation.
And finally had to dismiss the charges.
And they had to dismiss the charges, exactly.
And the charges were dismissed before he committed suicide?
Correct. And he was released. And again, the impact of just having to stay in that environment
for so long
is what resulted in him taking his own life later.
So how did all of this, her son's incarceration, how did it affect his mother?
I mean, deeply. She, was a very loving mother. It's what she kind of dedicated her life to. She's a foster mother, so she actually fostered children.
Okay.
And she also adopted children. Kalief was actually an adopted child. She adopted a set of siblings, and Kalief and 2 other siblings, Kamal and Dion, were a set of siblings that she adopted, and she adopted other children as well. So it was a very blended family, and she very much took pride in just being a motherly figure. And so it affected her deeply. And she had heart issues prior, but obviously once this happened, and she's the person who found him, right? So it was, a very traumatic moment.
You talk about the 3 years of her visiting him at Rikers Island, which is like an all-day affair trying to get to visit someone at Rikers Island and get back home. You talk about that in the film.
Yeah, because it's a journey that all people who go to Rikers, even if you're working there as an employee, as a visitor, for any reason, you have to take this long, enduring commute, particularly with public transportation. And so to do that, and on the weekends, as we all know, the weekends, the MTA, it's always usually not operating as well as it should, right? And so even on top of that, you have a lot of delays, but you have so many trains plus a bus to get to Rikers, which is what the film shows. And we take you on that ride for a portion of this film. And when you get to Rikers, you still have to go through a screening process, which is an additional at least 2 or 3, maybe 4 hours of waiting, screening, and then waiting. And then sometimes you do all of that for naught. You get there, you go through the screening process, you wait 4 hours, and then it's just, well, You can't see him today.
Right, and I think she had to do it like 32 times
Multiple.
over 3 years.
Multiple times, yeah.
She talks about being stuck in time, that life stopped for her after Kalief died.
Yeah, she was. I start with the film with that poem because that poem always sticks with me because it is. Everything stops for her, and it's just like she can no longer continue to live, and that's exactly how she felt. And I think ultimately that's exactly why she passed.
A year later, about a year later.
Yeah, about a year later, a little less than a year later, she passed. And I was thankful to have met her before then. But you know, we didn't have enough time together. You know, I expected her to voice these poems, which she couldn't do, obviously, because she passed away. But yes, she really had endured so much sadness. And then I started looking up grief, and I started finding, you know, the condition that's called broken heart syndrome, and it's definitely what she suffered from. Whenever a loved one loses a loved one that they care about so deeply, the heart literally breaks, and that's literally what happened to Venida.
One thing that I learned about in your film was about that there have been, for decades, there have been calls for improvement in city jails and calls for the getting rid of certain city jails. I did not know about the 1970 uprising at the Tombs.
That's right. Neither did I. But when I spent, you know, the film is not just about what happened to Kalief and Venida, but it's about legacy and what this case has done for New York City in terms of this looming question about Rikers and just how we as a city want to deal with incarceration. And in doing that, I have to follow advocates such as Darren, and this is how Darren and I met, and I started following his work, and him and other advocates and other activists and other electeds and leaders. Everybody's doing their part in terms of getting this, getting to a solution to this enormous problem. And so, you know, in finding him, we get to that point where we have a centralized kind of understanding of like what how large this was. And every time I would encounter them, they would say, well, this is, you know, not new. This has been happening for so long. And I said, okay, well, if that's the case, then I need to try and help personify that. I want to try and figure out how to do that. So we went into the archive. All you can do is go into the past. I'm a huge believer in understanding, you know, it's important to understand your history in order to understand the present. And so we went deep. We researched the entire history of Rikers. We researched all the other jail facilities in the city, which there are about 6 or so. And so in all of that, we get to 1970, and I said, whoa, there was a rebellion in all of the city jails, all of them.
All of them?
All of them,
okay.
Correct, in that one particular moment. And this was very interesting because we're coming out of the 1960s. It's a very active time, a lot of activists. The Panthers are very active. The Young Lords are very active in this city in particular. And very similar to today, a lot of things are mirrored today. People get swept and just get arrested en masse. And
so
then
yes. So this was over, you know, deplorable physical conditions, bad food, violence.
On the surface,
overcrowdedness.
On the surface, it was that, yes. But they would argue, the Panthers themselves and the historian Orisami Burton, who wrote the book Tip of the Spear, would argue that it was not just about conditions. It was about an understanding of like what the overall oppression of society meant for them.
Yeah.
And it was an opportunity to show that they were aware of their condition in terms of their oppression, and that they were able to organize around that.
Yeah.
And because it was an answer to the states, in this case the city's kind of attempt to sort of taper that activism, this was a response to that. So it wasn't necessarily just about conditions, of which they did suffer, and they are very mirrored to today, but it was also an answer to, well, if you're going to incarcerate us, then we're going to also push back in this space as well.
Yeah.
So it was an opportunity for actual organizing and social justice. So,
Darren, after Kalief's death, the city did agree to pay a $3.3 million settlement to the Browder estate. So obviously there was some recognition that what it had to him was a terrible injustice. But there were some reforms or announced reforms in the system that his story led to.
For decades, reforms have been happening, but survivors of Rikers Island like myself, our family members and allies came to the conclusion that Rikers can't be fixed, it can't be reformed, and the only solution is closure.
Okay. One of the so-called reforms was that the city they passed a law abolishing solitary confinement for younger people, I think 16 and 17-year-olds, because of the damaging effect on their health. And then the city legally abolished solitary confinement for all prisoners unless they were violent, and supposedly guaranteed all prisoners that they could spend at least 14 hours outside of their cells. Did that actually happen?
Well, unfortunately, because of the Adams administration, that they still implementing solitary confinement. They don't call it that, but they call it some other name. But unfortunately, solitary confinement still exists in New York City jail system. And I believe it's actually in court right now. The city council had to sue the mayor for not implementing this law.
Right.
And unfortunately, people right now, to this day, are losing their lives and suffering in solitary confinement.
Now, you spent some time in the criminal justice system in New York, and some time at Rikers. What was that experience? This was some time ago, but what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, it was. For me, it was traumatic because seeing at that time it was over 20,000 people detained on Rikers Island.
That's amazing.
And it was out of sight, out of mind. It wasn't on activists' radar during the time. And I've seen and heard a lot of bad things happening to people, the dehumanization, the trauma, the lack of care, and those things just exacerbated over the years. Now, because of activists, survivors of Rikers like myself, and organizational partners, and filmmakers shedding a light of what's actually happening there, and the people that is impacted, it basically put it into the city's focus. And thanks to organizational partners and survivors of Rikers, we got a law passed to close Rikers Island finally.
Another issue is bail reform. Supposedly, there has been some bail reform. Has there been any bail reform?
Yes, I believe it was 2018-19. New York State passed bail reform law, which impacted a lot of misdemeanor charges. Like there was no cash bail on those charges, and this is happening in cities all over the country.
Because that's why Kalief was in jail so long, because he couldn't afford I think it was $3,000 bail, right?
Exactly, and bail reform in New York, City has been more of a ransom than anything. It's mostly poor people, Black and brown New Yorkers who can't afford bail, which the majority of people on Rikers Island, I would say like 80%, are there detained because they can't afford bail. And there have been some rollbacks over the years of bail reform.
So here we are, years after Kalief died, and as of this August, more than 7,000 prisoners, I understand, are being detained on Rikers Island, most of them in pretrial detention. We get regular reports of inmates being beaten by guards, disgusting food, unsanitary conditions, inadequate medical care. So far this year, at least 10 inmate deaths at Rikers or right after release from Rikers. Recently, they released some tapes showing the 2022 suicide of Michael Nieves, slit his throat and bled to death while correction officers looked on. And one of the city's former prosecutors has said that, in a recent New York Times article, said that even under 2 mayors and 4 correction commissioners, the city has just been unable or unwilling to make reforms at Rikers, despite being given many chances to do so. Why? Why do conditions, after all of these years, after all of this news coverage, do the conditions remain the same? Or why?
Yeah, so number one, what's unique about New York City is that we have a jail next to the court, like that's how it is across the country, but we also have Rikers Island, which is, Sisa had mentioned, like it's a long distance to get there, it's isolated, and because of the isolation, there's a culture of violence because there's a lack of transparency. There's a culture of violence that exists there that you don't see like anywhere else. And, you know, the Department of Corrections has a culture of violence that hasn't been addressed, you know, for decades. And now that that advocates have, you know, raised awareness about what's happening there, like all eyes is on Rikers Island. And
so is this culture of violence, it is both within the correction officers, not just the inmates, correct?
Yes. The people who are detained there and staff, because of its isolation. You know, all across the country, people, you know, lawyers, families have access to the jail because it's next to the courts. And we have Rikers Island where there's just one bridge on there and one bridge off. And because of this distance, you know,
anything goes.
Anything goes.
Sisa, is it also a matter of, I mean, there's a lot of community, you know, if you close Rikers, you have to put the inmates someplace else. And no community wants jails. Hasn't that been a factor in why Rikers has not been closed?
Yes, but I would probably say that more so than just, you know, public community kind of resistance with that, which is understandable, totally understandable, that it has a lot to do with just a lot of other entities who kind of benefit from having an isolated jail space like Rikers to exist, prison industrial complex as we know.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of different contractors and entities that benefit from the status quo. So I would say I would put more of the onus on that system rather than the community pushback, although the community pushback does exist and it's completely and totally understandable. But I also want to believe that an informed community would have a more sort of transformative impact on this situation, which is why I made the film to begin with, because I think the public in general has a real fragmented understanding, including myself, before I started making this film, a real little bit here and there of understanding of how the situation is. For example, most people don't understand the difference between jails and prisons, and there's a huge difference. Jails are for people who are awaiting trial. They're not guilty of anything, technically.
Or else serving for a misdemeanor, something
a very, very small percentage, Sheryl.
Less than a year's
The majority
sentence.
of the population on jails are awaiting trial. That's a fact, okay? And then prisons are where people get transferred when they've been convicted of a felony. And so people need to understand that difference. And people, I think when they do understand that difference, which is a huge mission that I have in making this film, I think then community can then have an informed decision as to how they're going to approach these kind of large questions that affect their livelihoods, including building these facilities in their communities. Once they have a full informed understanding of what these spaces are, what's happening within them, and that they have a role in what's going on in that, a real one, right, that is really listening to them, then I think we can get somewhere. And I think that's really what's at stake of why things have not progressed.
Darren, what is your organization doing you say, you can't fix Rikers, you just have to close it. What is your organization doing to make that happen?
Yeah, so Freedom Agenda, which consists of people who are directly impacted by incarceration, that not only includes survivors of Rikers like myself, but also family members who have loved ones who experience incarceration or lost their loved ones, on Rikers Island. We basically do advocacy and organizing around these issues. We do like city budget advocacy because we believe that if you invest in the things that actually develops real community safety, it'll close the pipelines to incarceration. So a lot of our members, they testify at City Hall at criminal justice hearings. They write op-eds, and we do mobilize like rallies at City Hall to keep awareness, the city's awareness about what's happening. And just within the last 2 weeks now, there's been 3 deaths on Rikers Island. So now I believe, 12 or 13 deaths this year. Since the Adams administration been in office, it's been 44 people who lost their lives, at least 44, might be 45. But yeah, we continue to raise awareness and advocate that, for the city to decarcerate, to utilize their powers to people who are serving a city sentence who are eligible for a program called the 6A Early Release Program, which has proven to be effective, and the commissioner of the Department of Correction could utilize her power to release people back into the community under supervision. And so we try to push the city to do those things to bring the population down and expedite the closure of Rikers Island.
So it really seemed to be a matter of the public and the local government having the will to shut down Rikers,
Absolutely.
the will to reform this system that has so many people locked up and held in isolation. And I guess
for trial.
I'm sorry?
Waiting for trial.
Waiting for trial. And after all these years of talk, we'll have to see if that is going to happen. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank Sisa Bueno for Venida for Kalief, an entry in the Tribeca Film Festival, and Darren Mack, co-founder and director of Freedom Agenda, for joining me.
Also, we have a screening on September 27th at the Black Panther Film Festival at Maisel Cinema, and would be so grateful.
Where is that? Where?
Maisel Cinema is in Harlem.
Okay.
We'll have our next screening of the film at the Black Panther Film Festival, which is hosted at the Maisel Cinema. You can look that up, Google it, and hopefully we'll see you there. It's September 27th, 7 p.m.
Okay. To learn about our upcoming shows, you can follow us on Instagram at 121 CUNY TV, and you can watch the show on the go by downloading the CUNY TV app. For 121 and CUNY TV, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.